Hi guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to join 2 or more knitted tubes together to create this beautiful braided look. This project that I did is a baby blanket with 5 tubes, but you could use it for any project you need to join 2 or more tubes together. I love this method and it's super simple, so yeah, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cast on with waste yarn just like you normally would when you were making an ear warmer, for example. Then you're going to crank out however many rows you desire for your project. So for this baby blanket, I did 200 rows per tube. It is very important that you have the same amount of rows on each tube, but you can do it on any size machine the same way. It's the same method throughout. So now that I'm finished with my tube, I'm going to start the cast off process with waste yarn. It is a bit different than when we would normally cast off as if we were doing an ear warmer, because we're going around and we're going to pick up some stitches and we're going to drop some as well. So I'm going to crank out the next 5 rows of waste yarn, and it is very important to leave a long tail to pick up the stitches, like if we were making a hat, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and crank these next 5 rows out and I will be right back. Okay, now that I have my 5 rounds of waste yarn casted on, I want to make sure that I have a long tail here. It's really important that you have a long tail because you're going to go around and pick up stitches as you go. So I am going to go ahead and thread my needle here. I do use an angled smaller needle to pick up the stitches off of this Sentro 40 pin, just because it's just a little bit easier. So I am going to, this is where my black pin is, so this is the start where I started on all my rows. So I'm going to go ahead and crank it over a little bit, and I'm going to pick up these first 3 stitches. So I'm going to thread through just like if we were making a hat. Pick up 1, pick up 2, and then pick up the 3rd one. So after you pick up these 3 stitches, you are going to decide how many stitches you would like to drop. I normally drop 2. I've tried every size from 5 to 4 to 3. 2 just ends up looking the best, especially for this size of blanket that I did. But you can do however many drop stitches that you want to do to create the braid that you like best. So what I am going to do is I am going to skip the next 2 stitches, but it is very important though that you pick up your first 3 stitches, because this is where your round starts, and if you don't pick them up, you could drop more stitches than you would want to because it would fall apart. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the next 2 stitches and pick up all the other stitches in this round because I am on the final tube of my baby blanket, so I only need to attach it from one side. So I only need to drop 1 set of stitches. However, if you were going to be making a middle panel like this one, you would be connecting from both sides, so you would drop stitches on both sides. So how I do that is I see where my drop stitches are going to be, so my first 2 right here, and I look directly across. I usually mark it with this little dry erase marker so I can wipe it off whenever I need to. So basically, I just look across and see where it would be, and I mark it. To double check to make sure it's directly across, I would count on the sides of each stitches. So I would count from here across to here to make sure that it's the same amount of stitches from here to here on the other side. So that makes sure that your panel is flat. So I am going to go around and pick up every stitch in this round. I will show you when I get to the 2 pegs if you are doing a middle panel on how to do that as well. So I make my way around to where the next 2 needles would be, where we would drop our next stitches if we were doing a middle panel, for example. You would drop this stitch and then 1 right after, which means you would not pick it up on your needle and waste yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and pick these up because I am doing an end panel and I will not need to connect it on both sides. But you make your way all the way around back to the beginning Okay, now that we have cast it off, you can see where the drop stitches are because they will start dropping right away. This is your waste yarn dropping right here, and then it will go into your regular stitches. So this is where you are going to connect your other tube to these 2 stitches right here. Now this panel was a middle tube, so I dropped stitches on both sides right here so that I could connect from both sides. Now I'm just gonna turn this thing right side out. Now a lot of people tend to pull out their drop stitches all the way up the tube, but I find it's much easier to just pull as you go. That way you don't pick up the wrong strand and the stitches don't get all stretched out. It's just like my preferred way to do it. You can do it and pull it up the tube if you want. It's just a lot easier if you do it as you go. So I am just going to find my drop stitches again. There they are. And that is where I will connect it to the next panel. So I basically just straighten out my tube that way that the drop stitches are facing each other, so it makes it easier to do the next step. So for this project, I took a 5mm crochet hook or an H hook because it creates like the perfect loops. So what I do is I go through and I pick up the first 4 stitches from the tube on the right. You don't want to pick up your waste yarn. You want to pick up your project yarn. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And see how nice it is? It leaves it right there so I can pick up the next set when I come back. So I'm going to go over to the panel on my left and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find that first stitch after the waste yarn, and I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those 4 loops and pull it through the previous 4 loops. So that creates that effect from back and forth. Now I'm going to go back to the right panel and pick it up 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull those stitches through the loop that I had from the previous stitches. Now sometimes you want to make sure that you got all 4 loops through, so sometimes I just straighten it out and it should be all good. So again, back to the left, and I'm going to make sure I pick up the right strand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to pull those 4 loops again through the loop that was on my crochet hook. So that creates that design going up. It's kind of a zigzag, but from far away it looks like a braid. The waste yarn sometimes gets in the way, so you just kind of have to pull it out, but you should have it open on each side, so it should be pretty easy. So I'm just going to go back and forth up the stitches. Now these are what I call the Mickey ears. So there's a stitch on each side. So you're going to go in between those stitches, and that is how you are going to pull your loop out. You make sure that they go through both stitches because sometimes it gets stuck and you only pick up from 1 stitch and then your whole thing is off. So you're going to pick up 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then you're going to pull it through the previous loop. So those Mickey ears really help me out to see where my stitches are at. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then pull through the previous yarn. This is just a closer up version. So you're going to pick up 4 strands on the right, pull it through the previous 4, and then go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pull it through the same thing. So you're going to do that all the way up to the top of your tube. Super duper simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, and pull it through. 1, 2, 3, 4, and pull it through. It's that simple. So now I've reached the top of my tube, and you have to forgive me for this awful camera angle, but this is how it looks going up the panel. But yeah, you're going to get to the very top of the panel, and again, forgive me for this awful camera angle, but you're going to pick up the 4 stitches, pull it through, and then on the other side, you're going to pick up the last 4 stitches before you hit your waste yarn. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then all of your stitches should be picked up, and it should only have waste yarn left. If you have an extra stitch, it's okay. It just means you picked up something extra or missed one along the way. But you can always just throw it into that group of 4 and make it 5, or, you know, if you have 3, you can make it 3. So to tie this off, I hold it with a circle carabiner clip, but you can use a stitch marker or anything that will hold these 4 loops together, so it won't drop it, just like I did on the other side. So now I am going to go and close the top of this project. That way we can tie in where our little rings are and everything. Now these are the stitches that we picked up, and we're just going to close it just like we would an ear warmer. However, I do like the tighter aspect of it if you do pick up these first 2 stitches that are attached to that clip. So it'll be the last 4 stitches that you picked up. I usually go through the first one on each side, so that way it tightens everything up a little bit. And then you're just going to go back and forth like you would if you were closing an ear warmer. So just pick up from the top and then pick up from the bottom. And in this lighting, it looks like it's a similar color to the yarn, but in person it is contrasting enough so that I am able to see the difference between the 2 colors of yarn. So we're just going to work our way across, slip stitching, so pulling through. So we're going to pick up the loop and then pull it through, just like if we were closing an ear warmer. And we're going to do that all the way across to create the top of our blanket. It is important here that you do not miss a stitch, because if you do, you will drop a stitch for your entire project. And then you'll have to, you know, figure out how to tie it off then. But yes, you just go back and forth all the way across. So when you are almost done, you're going to come across where you started your project. So that's going to be like the little tail of yarn. I go through that part, so that way that little tail of yarn is secured. So what I do is I pull it through that stitch and then finish off by going back and forth and picking up the remaining stitches that there are. At the end, I also pick up, just like we did at the beginning with the 4 stitches that we used for our braid, I go through the top of those as well, just to make it tighter. Now I keep the yarn in the middle, that way, like when we go to tie it off, it's not scrunching anything up, or anything like that. So I'm just gonna go back and forth and pick up the remainder of the stitches here. Keeping that tail of yarn through the middle of the stitches that I'm pulling through. One more here. Now I am going to go through, just like I said, those 4 strands that I used to pull up on the last stitch of the other side. I'm going to use those top 2 strands because it just tightens everything up a little bit and it keeps it nice and centered as well. So through one side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my yarn and I'm just going to slip stitch it, pull it through. So I'm going to go through and pull it all the way through. Now it's important not to pull on this part because then you will shrink it. You will make it scrunch in and scrunch up, and that is not good. So what I do is I slip it through that first stitch, and I'm going to show you how to tie it off so that if you do pull on it, it's no big deal. So I'm going to go through that first stitch, pull up through, and then slip stitch through it. And this is going to create a little knot so that it's secure and so that it doesn't scrunch up your work because you wove that little tail through the last, 5 or 6 stitches. So here I am just checking to make sure none of the stitches are scrunched up or stretched out, and we are going to take off our waste yarn now. So what I do is, because it's looped through, I just pull from one side, pull out the waste yarn, and that satisfying pull that we all love. Now I always go through and double check and stretch it out, make sure no stitches were dropped, which means if I were to miss a stitch or miss picking it up when I was going across with the crochet hook, it would start unraveling at this point, which would be not good. So if any of your stitches start sliding over like that, you can just pull them back and stretch it back out. But yeah, so I take the little tail, and what I do is I use where I had clipped my carabiner clip on. I take my crochet hook and I run it through that loop, and you can take it off if you like, but I think it's easier if you leave it on. But I run it through that loop, and then I pull that little tail yarn all the way through the loop completely. That way it is now hooked onto something. It won't get loose and start unraveling everything. And at this point is when I take my carabiner off. So after I've done that, it is secured onto that little tail there. I go into the first stitch on the other side, pull it through, and create another little slip knot. So this is just attaching it to it. Now, I am going to be doing a border on mine, so if you're not, you can just leave it like that, but I don't usually like to leave that little bump right there. So what I'll do is I'll pull the yarn across, and you can do it as many times as you want to kind of get a thicker base, and this way it covers up that little bump right there. I go through the other side, the first stitch on the other side, and do the same thing. So I'm going to put it through the first stitch. I'm going to pull the yarn over, and this way you can gauge how tight you want it too. So you can pull it tighter, or you can keep it loose, or however you want. You can gauge how tight you want it. So I'm going to pull a little bit tighter, and then I'm just going to pull that little tail through and create another slip knot there. Now, because I do want a good foundation when I am doing that border, I'm going to go back another time and make sure it's a little bit thicker so I have more to grab onto when I am creating that border. So I'm going to go to the other side again, go through that first stitch and pull the yarn through. And again, you can gauge how tight you want it at this point. And then just pull that little tail through and create another slip knot. Just like that. I'm just checking how tight it is, if I like the tightness. So I pull it tight and it is good to go. That way it created a little bit of a thicker foundation chain for when I create my border. But yeah, that's how you attach the pieces, and it is going to be the same for the other sides as well. So this is the last panel that I was working on. So you're just going to close her along the top and do the same thing that we did with the loop through on the ring. So yeah, that's how you finish the top of your blanket. This is the bottom of the blanket. It is literally the same way. However, you do not have to go through that little loop, which is just one less step. So you're going to close along there, and because there is no exposed loop, you do not have to go through it. And a lot of people just leave these open, but I don't like how it looks open. So I take the little piece of string and go back and forth until I'm happy with the thickness of that like foundation chain that I'm going to use for the border. So that is it, guys. I hope this tutorial helped and made sense. Please let me know if it helped you out, or if you do make anything with this cool braid, let me know. I want to see it. I would love to see it from you guys. Thank you. Bye.